My gold-digging mother-in-law swiped my $850,000 inheritance in Dubai, cackling, "Just a nanny who trapped my son." I smirked. She didn't know about the hidden clause. Then her private jet crashed in the Alps. The bank called. Her fortune was already mine. Karma's a luxury, darling. The first time I met Ivy Hudson, she looked me up and down with eyes that could freeze Saharan sand. I stood in her immaculate living room, my hand extended, still warm from helping her son Hudson with his physical therapy. "So you're the nanny," she said, deliberately ignoring my outstretched hand. "Rather young, aren't you? And quite pretty." The way she said pretty made it sound like a crime. I lowered my hand slowly, forcing a professional smile. "I'm Lillian Moore. I'm actually Hudson's physical therapist, not his nanny. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hudson." She circled me like a vulture assessing its next meal. "Well, I'm sure it is." Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of empowerment, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Let's dive in. That was 7 years ago, the beginning of what would become the most challenging relationship of my life. I was 26 then, fresh out of my residency, assigned to help 34-year-old Hudson recover from a skiing accident that had shattered his femur. I had no designs on her son's fortune. I wasn't even aware of the Hudson family wealth until my third session, when I noticed the original Monet hanging casually in his home gym. Hudson was different from his mother, kind, humble despite his privilege, with a self-deprecating humor that made our therapy sessions fly by. He joked about his ridiculous trust fund lifestyle, and seemed genuinely interested in my middle-class upbringing in Ohio. Our romance developed slowly, organically, over shared coffee after his sessions and long conversations about everything from classic films to childhood dreams. But to Ivy I was always the gold digger, the fortune hunter, the nobody who somehow enchanted her son. "You realize this is just a phase for him," she told me one evening, cornering me in Hudson's kitchen when he was taking a call in his office. "He's vulnerable right now. Dependent. When he's fully recovered, he'll see you for what you are." "And what am I, Mrs. Hudson?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady despite my racing heart. She smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "A stepping stone, dear. A common girl reaching above her station." I didn't tell Hudson about these encounters. He adored his mother despite her flaws, and I didn't want to drive a wedge between them. I thought that with time she would see my genuine love for her son. I was naive. Our engagement announcement 6 months later sent Ivy into a barely concealed frenzy. She orchestrated a dinner at the Hudson estate that felt more like an inquisition, inviting family friends who, coincidentally, asked about my family background, education, and career aspirations. When I mentioned my parents were teachers, Ivy's smile tightened. "How quaint," she murmured into her wine glass. The wedding was a spectacle of excess that made me deeply uncomfortable. I wanted something small and meaningful. Ivy wanted, and ultimately orchestrated, a society event with 400 guests, most of whom were strangers to me. I walked down the aisle past faces that examined me with the same calculating assessment Ivy had mastered. During the reception, I overheard her speaking to an elegant older woman by the champagne fountain. The girl was his physical therapist, she was saying, her voice a theatrical whisper designed to carry. "Practically a nanny, really. Caught him at his weakest. You know how these calculating types operate." "But she seems lovely, Ivy," the woman replied, glancing my way. "Oh, she's clever, I'll give her that. Hudson was always too trusting. Like his father." Ivy sipped her champagne. "Just a nanny who trapped my son. I give it 3 years before the divorce, 5 if she gets pregnant first." I slipped away before they noticed me, finding Hudson on the dance floor. I held him tighter than usual that night. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing the change in my demeanor. "Perfect," I lied, resting my head against his chest. "Just perfect." The first year of our marriage was a delicate balancing act. Hudson tried to foster peace between his mother and me, arranging Sunday brunches and holiday gatherings that inevitably devolved into Ivy's passive-aggressive commentary. I developed a thick skin, focusing instead on building our life together in the brownstone Hudson had purchased in a quieter part of the city, away from his mother's mansion. Then came the headaches. Hudson dismissed them at first, stress from work, he insisted. But when I found him disoriented in the kitchen one morning, unable to remember what day it was, I insisted on taking him to the hospital. The diagnosis was devastating. A rapidly growing brain tumor with a grim prognosis. Suddenly, Ivy and I were united by fear, orbiting Hudson's hospital room like planets around a dying sun. Our shared concern did nothing to warm her toward me. If anything, her hostility intensified. She questioned every medical decision, dismissed my right to participate in discussions with doctors, and implied repeatedly that my nursing background made me ill-equipped to understand Hudson's complex condition. "This is beyond your expertise," she'd say when I asked questions during the doctor's rounds. "Perhaps we should let those with actual medical degrees handle things." Hudson's decline was swift and merciless. Within 3 months he went from vibrant to bedridden. The specialists offered experimental treatments, all with minimal chances of success. Ivy pushed for every option, regardless of how it affected Hudson's quality of life. "He wouldn't want this," I told her quietly one night as Hudson slept, heavily sedated after a particularly aggressive treatment. "What would you know about what my son wants?" she hissed. "You've known him for minutes compared to my lifetime." I didn't argue. The truth was, Hudson had made his wishes clear to me in the privacy of our home, in the devastating conversations that followed his diagnosis. He didn't want extraordinary measures. He wanted dignity. Peace. He died on a Tuesday night in early autumn. I was holding his hand reading from his favorite novel when his breathing changed. I knew before the monitors alarmed. Ivy had stepped out for coffee. By the time she returned, Hudson was gone. She looked at me, at her son, at the book in my lap, and something in her broke and reformed into pure rage. "You let him go," she accused, her voice low and dangerous. "You didn't call anyone. He didn't want. Get out." She pointed to the door. "Get out." The days following Hudson's death passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and legal meetings. Ivy took control of everything, relegating me to the role of grieving widow with no actual input. The funeral was as grandiose as our wedding had been, with the same society faces offering condolences that never quite reached their eyes. The reading of the will took place in the somber wood-paneled office of the Hudson family attorney. I sat across from Ivy, both of us hollow-eyed from grief and sleeplessness. When the attorney announced that Hudson had left me $850,000, a fraction of his wealth, but still a life-changing amount, Ivy's face contorted with fury. "Impossible," she snapped. "He would never leave that much to," she caught herself, but we all heard the unfinished sentiment. "To the gold digger. To the nanny. To the woman who trapped her son." The attorney continued reading, detailing how the majority of Hudson's estate would go to his mother, with specific provisions for various charities. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted something of Hudson to keep, something that proved our love had been real, not the calculated scheme his mother had always believed it to be. As we left the attorney's office, Ivy brushed past me, pausing just long enough to whisper, "Enjoy your consolation prize. It's more than you deserve." I watched her walk to her waiting car, straight-backed and seemingly unbroken despite everything. I had no idea then that her dismissal of me would lead to her downfall, or that Hudson had foreseen his mother's true nature with far more clarity than I ever gave him credit for. 2 months after Hudson's funeral, my phone rang at 7:30 on a Sunday morning. I squinted at the screen, my heart jumping when I saw the caller ID. "Ivy." I answered, my voice still rough with sleep. "Lillian, darling," she chirped with a warmth I'd never heard before. "I hope I'm not calling too early." I sat up in bed, instantly wary. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually." She paused dramatically. "I've been doing some reflecting since Hudson's passing. About us. About how he would want us to move forward." I remained silent, waiting for the catch. "I realize I've been difficult," she continued. "Grief makes monsters of us all, doesn't it? I'd like to make amends." Over the next 3 weeks, Ivy launched what could only be described as a charm offensive. Lunch invitations. Thoughtful gifts delivered to my door. Even a framed photo of Hudson I'd never seen before, taken during a sailing trip when he was in college. His smile was radiant, carefree, a treasure. "I don't understand," I confided to my sister over coffee. "It's like she's had a personality transplant." Maybe she's realized life's too short for grudges, my sister suggested. I wasn't convinced. This is Ivy we're talking about. The woman has held grudges since the Nixon administration. The invitation to Dubai came after a surprisingly pleasant dinner at her home. Ivy was flying there for a business conference and suddenly couldn't bear the thought of going alone. Hudson always handled the international ventures, she explained, refilling my wine glass. I could use a friendly face, someone to keep me company between meetings. Plus, she added with a conspiratorial smile, Dubai's shopping is unparalleled. Consider it a girl's trip. Every instinct told me to decline. Yet something, curiosity perhaps, or a lingering desire to forge peace with my last connection to Hudson, made me say yes. Dubai was a gleaming monument to excess, all impossible skyscrapers and manufactured luxury rising from the desert. We stayed in a suite at the Burj Al Arab that was bigger than my entire apartment. Ivy was uncharacteristically generous, insisting I accompany her to designer boutiques where she purchased scarves and handbags for me with casual flicks of her platinum card. Hudson would want you to have nice things, she insisted when I protested. The strangeness began on our third day. Ivy had scheduled what she called boring financial meetings, and suggested I enjoy the hotel spa instead. You'd be terribly bored, darling. All numbers and legal jargon, she said, waving me off. I might have believed her if I hadn't glimpsed the name on her calendar while she was showing me photos on her tablet. First Emirates Financial Trust, the same bank where Hudson had established my inheritance account. When she returned hours later, her smile seemed tighter, her generosity more calculated. Something had shifted. That night I couldn't sleep, a nagging unease keeping me awake. Around 3 a.m., I decided to check my inheritance account through the banking app on my phone. Something I hadn't done since the funds were first transferred. The balance read $0. I refreshed the page thinking it was a glitch. Nothing changed. My heart hammered against my ribs as I navigated to the transaction history. A single transfer authorized that very day. $850,000 to Ivy Hudson Enterprises. The room tilted around me. I gripped the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. This was why we were in Dubai, far from our normal banks, in a financial system where Ivy had connections. This explained the sudden kindness, the gifts, the reconciliation campaign. It had all been a setup. Morning came with excruciating slowness. I dressed mechanically, my mind racing through options. We were scheduled to fly home the following day. I had limited funds of my own, my passport, and a growing sense of betrayal that threatened to choke me. Ivy was already sipping coffee on our suite's terrace when I emerged, her silk robe catching the early light. "Sleep well?" she asked pleasantly. "What did you do?" My voice was barely audible. She raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow. "I'm afraid you'll have to be more specific, dear. The money. Hudson's inheritance to me. It's gone." Ivy took a leisurely sip of her coffee, studying me over the rim of her cup. "Oh, that. Yes, I've rectified a mistake." "A mistake." I moved closer, my hands trembling. "That money was legally mine." "Was it?" She set her cup down carefully. "Hudson wasn't in his right mind toward the end. Brain tumors can cause such confusion, such poor judgment. The family attorney agrees that certain provisions of the will should be reviewed." "You're stealing from me." She laughed, then, a sound like breaking glass. "Stealing implies taking something that rightfully belongs to someone else. That money is Hudson family money. It was never meant for temporary additions." "I was his wife," I said, my voice rising. "You were his caretaker who got a promotion." Ivy stood, dropping all pretense of civility. "Let's be honest, Lillian. You were just a nanny who trapped my son during his weakest moment. Did you really think I would allow you to walk away with Hudson's money?" Hot tears pricked behind my eyes, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing them fall. "This won't stand. I'll fight you." "With what resources?" She gestured broadly at our opulent surroundings. "This level of legal battle requires money, connections, influence, all things you conspicuously lack. Face it, dear. You had a good run, but the game is over." The mask had fallen completely now, revealing the ruthless adversary I'd always known lurked beneath Ivy's polished exterior. In that moment, I hated her with a purity that frightened me. "Hudson loved me," I said quietly. "That's what you could never accept." Something flashed in her eyes, pain perhaps, or a flicker of doubt quickly suppressed. Love is a luxury for people who don't have legacies to protect. The Hudson name meant nothing to you beyond the bank account attached to it. I retreated to my room, hastily packing my belongings. There was no point staying another night in this gilded prison. I booked the first available flight home, depleting most of my savings in the process. Ivy didn't try to stop me. "Running home with your tail between your legs?" she called as I wheeled my suitcase toward the door. "Probably for the best. I have actual business to finish here." The journey home was a blur of sterile airports and cramped airplane seats, my mind cycling between shock, rage, and grief. I'd lost Hudson, and now I'd lost the financial security he'd wanted me to have. I felt hollowed out, defeated in a game I hadn't known we were playing. My apartment felt small and empty after the Dubai extravagance. I dropped my suitcase in the entryway and collapsed onto the couch, too exhausted even for tears. That's when I noticed the small stack of mail on my coffee table. My neighbor must have brought it in. Among the bills and flyers was a thick cream envelope with my name written in Hudson's distinctive handwriting. The postmark was dated 2 days after his death. He must have arranged for it to be sent in the event of his passing. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Lillian," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're about to discover just how far my mother might go to protect what she considers hers." I sat motionless on my couch, Hudson's letter trembling in my hands as I read his final message to me. "My dearest Lillian, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're about to discover just how far my mother might go to protect what she considers hers. I hope I'm wrong. I hope she respects my wishes and treats you with the dignity you deserve. But I've known my mother all my life, and I've prepared for the possibility that she won't." My throat tightened as his voice seemed to materialize in our small living room, as clear as if he were sitting beside me. "There's a key taped to the back of the bottom drawer in my desk at home. It opens the floor safe in my study behind the Persian rug. Inside you'll find everything you need. Don't tell anyone about this letter until you've retrieved those documents. I love you, Lillian. More than you'll ever know. And I'm sorry I won't be there to protect you from what might come. But trust me when I say this. You are stronger than you realize, and I've made sure you won't face this alone." I drove to our brownstone, Hudson's brownstone, the next morning. I'd been avoiding the place since his death, unable to face the emptiness. Now stepping inside felt like walking into a time capsule. His scent still lingered faintly in the air, sandalwood and that particular laundry detergent he insisted on using despite its ridiculous cost. I moved through the quiet rooms like a ghost, trailing my fingers over furniture, remembering. In his study, I rolled back the antique Persian rug, revealing the hardwood floor beneath. The safe was exactly where he said it would be, its existence a complete surprise to me. The key turned with a satisfying click. Inside lay a sealed manila envelope with "contingency" written across it in Hudson's bold handwriting. Beneath that was a business card for someone named Edward Winters, with a handwritten note on the back. "Call before opening the envelope." Edward Winters turned out to be an attorney I'd never met, not the Hudson family lawyer who had read the will, but someone Hudson had apparently trusted with his most sensitive matters. His office was modest, in a converted brownstone in a quieter part of the city, miles away from the gleaming downtown towers where Hudson had conducted his business affairs. "Mrs. Hudson," Edward greeted me, a slight man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I've been expecting you. Hudson said you might come." "He prepared for this," I said, still processing the realization. "He knew what his mother might do." Edward gestured to a chair. Hudson was many things, but naive wasn't one of them. He understood his mother's nature better than anyone. I placed the sealed envelope on his desk. "He told me to bring this to you before opening it." Edward nodded, his expression grave. "Before we proceed, I need to ask, has Ivy made any attempt to interfere with your inheritance?" My laugh was hollow. "Interfere? She's stolen it outright. Every penny. Lured me to Dubai and transferred it all to her company account while we were there." Something like satisfaction flickered across Edward's face. "Then what I'm about to show you becomes relevant." He reached for the envelope. Inside was a thick document, a secondary will and testament that I'd never seen before. Edward spread the pages carefully on his desk, pointing to specific sections as he explained. Hudson created what we call a contingency clause. It's quite brilliant, actually. He left you what appeared to be a modest inheritance by Hudson's standards. $850,000, I supplied. Exactly. A sum large enough to provide security but small enough that Ivy might view it as dispensable. A test, if you will. A test. I leaned forward, confusion giving way to a dawning understanding. Hudson suspected that if his mother was going to make a move against you, she would target this inheritance first. So he created a trap in essence. Edward tapped a particularly dense paragraph of legal text. This clause stipulates that if Ivy Hudson ever attempted to divert, withhold, or reclaim the initial inheritance left to you, a secondary provision would activate. My heart began to race. What provision? The automatic transfer of 51% of Ivy Hudson Enterprises to you, along with controlling interest in the Hudson Family Trust. The room seemed to tilt. That would be approximately $65 million at current valuation, Edward finished quietly. Plus ongoing interest in all Hudson business ventures. I stood abruptly, needing to move. This can't be legal. She'll fight it. She can try, Edward said, his confidence unwavering. But Hudson made certain this document would withstand any challenge. He had 5 years to perfect it after all. 5 years. I turned to him, stunned. He's been planning this since before we were married? Edward's expression softened. Hudson came to me shortly after his accident, after he'd begun to see the tension between you and his mother. He said, "My mother has spent a lifetime protecting the Hudson fortune from outsiders. I need to protect the woman I love from my mother." Tears sprang to my eyes, unexpected and hot. All this time, I'd thought I was shielding Hudson from the worst of Ivy's behavior, never realizing he'd seen everything, and had been quietly preparing a safety net I never knew I'd need. "There's something else you should know," Edward continued. "This clause doesn't activate automatically. There are specific conditions." He explained the intricate legal framework Hudson had designed. The transfer of assets wouldn't happen immediately. There would need to be documented proof of Ivy's interference, certified by an independent financial investigator. The process could take months. "So what do I do now?" I asked when he finished. "Nothing," Edward said simply. "That's the beauty of Hudson's plan. We wait. We document. We prepare the case methodically. Ivy believes she's won, which means she'll grow confident, perhaps careless. You want me to just let her think she's gotten away with it?" The idea tasted bitter. "Precisely." Edward gathered the papers carefully. Any confrontation now would only alert her, give her time to cover her tracks or find a legal workaround. "Patience is your greatest weapon, Mrs. Hudson." Patience. The very thought of allowing Ivy to believe she'd succeeded in erasing my last connection to Hudson made my skin crawl. But looking at the meticulously prepared documents before me, I recognized the wisdom in Hudson's strategy. He had known his mother would act exactly as she had, and he had prepared a response that would be devastating in its completeness. I left Edward's office with copies of all the documents and a strange, contradictory feeling in my chest. Grief for the husband I'd lost, amazement at his foresight, and something new, a quiet, simmering satisfaction at the thought of justice waiting in the wings. The months that followed were an exercise in self-restraint. I returned to work at the physical therapy clinic, taking comfort in the simple act of helping others heal. I moved to a smaller apartment, sold my car for something more economical, and lived frugally, all while knowing that a fortune potentially awaited me. The contrast was sometimes surreal. Ivy returned from Dubai triumphant, making no attempt to contact me. Occasionally I'd spot her in society pages, draped in designer clothes at charity galas, the picture of wealthy widowhood. Each photograph strengthened my resolve to see Hudson's plan through. Edward called regularly with updates. Financial investigators were documenting the paper trail from Dubai. Legal experts were preparing the case that would eventually trigger the contingency clause. How much longer? I asked during one such call 6 months after discovering the secret will. "These things take time," Edward counseled. "But we're getting close. The evidence is overwhelming." I hung up and gazed out my window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Ivy Hudson was living her life, believing she had won our silent war. She had no idea what was coming, what Hudson had set in motion from beyond the grave. For now, that knowledge was enough. I could wait. Hudson had taught me that justice doesn't always arrive on our preferred timeline, but it arrives nonetheless. That night I dreamed of Hudson. Not sick and fading in a hospital bed, but vibrant and laughing as he had been when we first met. In the dream, he simply nodded at me as if to say, "Watch. Just watch what happens next." Nearly 8 months had passed since my discovery of Hudson's contingency plan. Winter had given way to spring, then summer, and now the crisp edge of autumn had returned. A full year since Hudson's death. Through it all, Edward and his team had worked methodically, building our case against Ivy with the thoroughness of master architects. "We're filing the formal complaint next week," Edward told me during our regular Tuesday call. "Once we do, Ivy will receive formal notice. You should prepare yourself for her reaction." I had just finished with my last patient of the day, a college athlete recovering from ACL surgery. "I'm ready," I assured him, though the thought of facing Ivy's wrath still sent a flutter of anxiety through my chest. That evening, I settled onto my couch with a glass of wine and turned on the evening news. A habit I'd developed during Hudson's illness and never quite abandoned. The familiar drone of the anchor's voice was oddly comforting as I scrolled through emails on my phone. Breaking news from Europe. The anchor announced suddenly, his tone shifting to the practiced gravity reserved for disasters. A private jet has reportedly gone down while crossing the Swiss Alps. Early reports indicate the aircraft belonged to American business magnate Ivy Hudson, CEO of Hudson Enterprises. The wine glass slipped from my fingers, spilling across my coffee table. I scrambled for the remote, turning up the volume. En route from Geneva to Milan when contact was lost approximately 40 minutes into the flight. Swiss rescue teams have been dispatched to the location of the last radar contact, but officials warn that the mountainous terrain and deteriorating weather conditions may hamper search efforts. My phone rang. Edward's name flashed on the screen. "Are you watching the news?" he asked without preamble. "Yes," I managed, my voice barely audible. "Is it true? Is it really her plane?" "Confirmed. She was heading to a luxury goods conference in Milan." He paused. "Lillian, I need to ask, did you tell anyone about our case? About what we've been building?" The implication hit me like a slap. "You think I had something to do with this?" "No," he said quickly. "Absolutely not. But we need to be prepared for questions. This timing, it's unfortunate." Unfortunate. Such a bland word for what was unfolding. I hung up and sat in stunned silence, watching as news helicopters captured distant footage of smoke rising from a jagged alpine peak. The surreal quality of the moment was overwhelming. Ivy, the indomitable force that had shaped so much of my life since meeting Hudson, might simply be gone. The confirmation came in the early hours of the morning. No survivors. The news showed grainy photos of the wreckage scattered across a snow-dusted mountainside. I stared at the images, waiting to feel something, anything, definitive. Instead, I experienced a confusing tumult of emotions. Shock, a hollow sense of loss, and underneath it all, a whisper I didn't want to acknowledge. Justice. That whisper frightened me. Was I really the kind of person who could feel vindication at another human's death? Even someone who had caused me so much pain? The following days unfolded in a blur of media coverage and phone calls. The investigation began immediately, with early reports suggesting mechanical failure. Ivy's assistant reached out, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, to inform me of the funeral arrangements. It would be held at St. Andrew's Cathedral, the same church where Hudson and I had married. 3 days after the crash, as I was preparing dinner in my small kitchen, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Hudson? This is Marcus Brennan from First National Trust." The voice was professionally somber. "First, please accept my condolences on the passing of your mother-in-law." "Thank you," I replied automatically, though the words mother-in-law seemed an insufficient label for what Ivy had been to me. "I'm calling regarding some significant account activity that requires your attention. You see, we've received documentation triggering what appears to be an automatic transfer of assets from the late Mrs. Hudson's holdings to accounts newly established in your name." My knife paused over the half-chopped onion. "I'm sorry. Yes, we were quite surprised ourselves. According to our records, the transfer was initiated by pre-existing legal instructions tied to, let me see, A contingency clause in an auxiliary will filed by your late husband Hudson Baldwin Hudson III. The contingency clause. I leaned against the counter for support. How much are we talking about? The figure he named made me sink to the floor, the phone clutched to my ear. Hudson's plan had been activated, not by our legal case which had never been filed but by Ivy's death. The timing was so impeccable it seemed orchestrated by some cosmic playwright with a dark sense of irony. That evening a detailed email arrived from Edward, explaining what had happened. Hudson's contingency clause had included a secondary trigger. In the event of Ivy's death before our case was settled, all contested assets would automatically transfer to me. It was a standard legal protection he'd included, never imagining it would be the primary mechanism through which the clause would activate. The preliminary investigation reports are clear, Edward wrote. Mechanical failure in the left engine followed by a catastrophic system breakdown. The maintenance logs show corner cutting on inspections. Ivy's decision apparently to save costs. There's absolutely nothing connecting this to our case, which I should note we never formally filed. I read those words repeatedly, seeking the reassurance they offered. This wasn't my doing. This wasn't even Hudson's doing, really. Ivy's own choices, her cost-cutting, her decisions had led to this outcome. There was a bitter poetry to it that I couldn't fully process. The day of the funeral arrived with unseasonable warmth, the late September sun casting long shadows across the cathedral steps. I arrived early, dressed in a simple black dress that Hudson had always liked. The church filled quickly with New York's elite, politicians, celebrities, business magnates, all come to pay respects to a woman many had feared rather than loved. I sat in the front row, where the funeral director had awkwardly but firmly placed me as Ivy's only remaining family. Throughout the service I felt the weight of stares boring into my back, heard the hushed whispers behind cupped hands. That's the daughter-in-law. Heard everything's been left to her. Suspicious timing, don't you think? At the graveside, a tall woman in an impeccable suit approached me. Helen Blackwood, she introduced herself. I was Ivy's oldest friend. Her gaze was calculating. Quite a reversal of fortune for you, isn't it? 1 minute, a physical therapist living in a rental apartment. The next, one of the wealthiest women in the city. I met her eyes steadily. Fortune is a strange thing, Ms. Blackwood. It reverses for all of us eventually. Indeed. She studied me as if trying to solve a puzzle. You know, Ivy always said her son didn't know what he was doing when he married you. Perhaps she was wrong about that, and much else. She moved away, leaving me alone by the fresh grave. I placed a single white rose atop the gleaming casket. Goodbye, Ivy, I whispered, feeling neither triumph nor hatred, just the quiet certainty that Hudson had been right all along. Justice finds its own path, its own time. As I turned to leave, I noticed Edward waiting respectfully at a distance. The crowd of mourners parted before me, their curious gazes following my every move. I walked toward my future with my head high, carrying the weight of Hudson's final gift. Not just the wealth, but the reminder that love protects in ways we cannot always foresee. Edward approached me as I walked away from Ivy's grave, offering his arm in a gentlemanly gesture that reminded me of Hudson. Are you all right? He asked quietly as we navigated the cemetery's winding path, trailed by curious glances from the funeral attendees. I'm not sure what I am, I admitted. Everything's happened so fast. 2 weeks after the funeral, I found myself sitting in the echoing great room of the Hudson Mansion. My mansion now, according to the paperwork Edward's firm had processed with astonishing efficiency. $65 million. Controlling interest in Hudson Enterprises. Properties in 5 countries. The full extent of the fortune was still being catalogued by a team of accountants who spoke to me in deferential tones that made my skin crawl. I wandered through the cavernous rooms like a tourist in someone else's life. Though I'd visited this house many times with Hudson, I'd never spent a night here. Now the staff asked me about dinner preferences and which bedroom I wanted prepared. The absurdity of it all hit me as I stood in Ivy's enormous closet, larger than my entire apartment, filled with designer clothes that still carried the fainty scent of her perfume. What am I supposed to do with all this? I whispered to the empty room. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the terrace overlooking the manicured gardens, wrapped in Hudson's old cardigan that I'd brought from our brownstone. The wealth surrounding me felt tainted, not just by Ivy's hostility toward me, but by the uncomfortable reality that I had benefited from her death. The cosmic justice of it all didn't erase the fact that a human life had ended. By morning I'd made my first decision as the new head of the Hudson fortune. I wouldn't live in this mausoleum of painful memories. I want to sell it, I told Edward over coffee in the sunny breakfast room. The house, the art, the furnishings, all of it. He paused, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. That's certainly your prerogative. But there's significant historical value in many of the pieces Ivy collected. The Hudson name is attached to donations in several museums. There would be social implications. I'm already facing those implications, I pointed out. Half of New York society thinks I somehow orchestrated Ivy's death to get her money. Edward didn't argue with this assessment. What would you do with the proceeds? The question crystallized something that had been forming in my mind since reading Hudson's letter all those months ago. I want to establish a foundation. Something that would help ordinary people, people like me before all this, who find themselves in battles they can't afford to fight. Edward's eyes lit up with genuine interest. Legal aid. More than that. The idea was taking shape as I spoke. Financial advocacy. Legal protection. Education about rights and options. All the things I didn't have when Ivy stole my inheritance. Over the next month, the Hudson Mansion was systematically dismantled. Auction houses competed for the opportunity to sell the renowned Hudson collection. The proceeds from the art alone were staggering. I kept only a few pieces that had been special to Hudson. A small hopper that had hung in his study, a sculpture we'd bought together during our honeymoon in Santa Fe. I moved back to our brownstone, the one place that still felt like home. There, surrounded by memories of our brief happiness, I began to plan the Hudson Justice Foundation with Edward's guidance and the help of experts in nonprofit management. You'll need a board of directors, advised Meredith Chin, a nonprofit consultant Edward had introduced me to. People with expertise, connections, and shared values. Finding those people meant reconnecting with the world I'd inhabited before marrying into the Hudson dynasty. My fellow physical therapists, Hudson's doctors, community advocates I'd volunteered with during college. People who had known me as Lillian Moore, not as a Hudson or an heiress. Dr. Samantha Wells, Hudson's oncologist, was the first to accept my invitation to join the board. Hudson would have loved this, she told me over lunch at a small cafe near the hospital. He always said you saw people, really saw them, in a way his mother never could. Marcus Taylor, my former supervisor at the rehab center, initially declined. I don't know anything about foundations or millions of dollars, he protested. That's exactly why I need you, I countered. This foundation isn't about wealthy people deciding what others need. It's about making justice accessible to everyone. He joined the following week. 6 months after Ivy's funeral, the Hudson Justice Foundation officially launched. Our first initiative focused on helping medical patients facing financial exploitation during their most vulnerable moments. The work consumed me in the best possible way, giving purpose to wealth I had never sought. You're making waves, Edward informed me during one of our regular strategy meetings. Several of Ivy's old associates have expressed concerns about the foundation's mission. Good, I replied, surprising myself with my lack of apprehension. Maybe they should be concerned. As the foundation grew, I gradually sold off the more extravagant symbols of Hudson wealth. The penthouse in Paris, the yacht in Monaco, the private island off Belize. Each sale channeled more resources into programs that helped people stand up to corporate giants and wealthy adversaries. 1 year to the day after Ivy's funeral, I finalized the sale of her prized possession, the private jet she had replaced just months before her fatal crash. The buyer, a tech billionaire with a reputation for ostentation, seemed puzzled by my lack of sentimentality about the aircraft. Most people in your position wouldn't part with a jet like this, he remarked as we completed the transaction. I'm finding I'm not most people, I replied. That evening I walked through our brownstone, now truly mine in spirit as well as deed. I'd kept it much as it had been when Hudson was alive, with a few changes that made it more completely ours rather than just his. My physical therapy books shared shelf space with his first editions. My grandmother's quilt draped across the foot of our bed. On Hudson's birthday, I visited his grave bringing sunflowers, his favorite. The simple headstone we'd chosen together during his final weeks stood in stark contrast to the ornate Hudson family monument where Ivy now rested. "You were right," I told him, settling onto the grass beside his grave. "About so many things. About your mother. About what matters in the end." The autumn breeze rustled the trees overhead, sending a shower of golden leaves spiraling down around me. I thought about the path that had led me here, from a middle-class girl from Ohio to a wealthy widow to whatever I was becoming now. The journey had transformed me in ways I never could have anticipated. The golden cage that Ivy had perceived around the Hudson fortune. The notion that wealth must be hoarded, protected from outsiders, preserved at all costs, had been her prison, not mine. In trying to lock me out, she had ultimately locked herself in, living and dying by the cold metrics of financial worth rather than human connection. As I walked back to my car, phone buzzing with updates from the foundation team, I realized that Hudson's true legacy wasn't the money he'd left me or even the clever legal trap he'd set. It was the understanding that freedom comes not from what you possess, but from what possesses you. I had wealth now, yes, but it didn't define me. It was simply a tool like the therapeutic techniques I'd once used to help patients heal. And like those techniques, its value lay entirely in how it was applied. "Karma's a luxury, darling," Ivy had once said dismissively during one of our tense early encounters. She'd meant it as a cutting remark, that justice was a fantasy poor people clung to while the wealthy made their own rules. She hadn't lived long enough to learn how wrong she was. But I had, and that knowledge was the greatest inheritance of all.